All right, welcome to another episode of the Sport Management Office Hours podcast. I'm Nick Zoroya. This is Brandon Podgorski, and today we are welcoming in Dr. Kelsey Slater, an assistant professor of sport management at North Dakota State University. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
And this is exactly what the show is about. I put a call out to the network to ask, does anybody know anything about setting up travel abroad programs, anything related to that? And quickly, Kelsey hit my inbox and said, I have some experience with this. I would love to help you guys out. And here we are filling that gap immediately. So, Kelsey, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background with study abroad, and then we can get into some of those topics we just talked about off show.
Yeah. Um, when I interviewed for my position at North Dakota State, I one of the things I said on my interview is that I thought an emphasis on international sport was missing, not just in our curriculum, but in like curriculums in general in sport management. And sport, I think, as we all know, is increasingly globalized. Right. So even you think about in the American context, the NFL plays multiple games overseas, right? Expanding to Brazil this year, Spain next year. The NBA, MLB, the NHL, they all are really investing heavily in promoting sport in a global to global audiences. And I think it's a skills gap that we kind of see that in sport management students is those kinds of intercultural competencies and uh, so that's a problem that I've always seen and wanted to solve. And I pretty much committed to creating a study abroad program in my interview. And then when I got here, I realized how I had to deliver, and that was going to be a ton of work. Um, and I didn't really know exactly where to start. So I was really fortunate that we have a really great study abroad office here at NDSU. And, we talked about different options, whether it's faculty led or, helping students find partnering programs where they could, study for a semester or, a year is a lot of the times impractical for sport management students, especially our student athletes. And even a semester is sometimes really impractical for them. So trying to create some shorter term opportunities that are going to have an impact on their intellectual and academic and personal development was really important. And I didn't know necessarily exactly where to start, but I wrote a grant, the Ideas Grant, which is sponsored by the U.S. Department of State. It's for diversifying study abroad opportunities for U.S. undergraduates. And sport management students, I think, are really underserved in study abroad. So that was kind of the angle that I took. And before I got to NDSU, I think the data was like in the last 11 years, so probably 12 years now, before this past year. We had four student abroad sport management students study abroad total.
Okay.
And there was I couldn't find any examples after 2016. So that I immediately kind of saw as problematic. And the Ideas Grant was great because it provided some funding for me on like curriculum development as well as I did an exploratory trip and I went to Cape Town on my own to meet with different contacts that I had there. Um, and then we were able to kind of start the program, and I took 7 students to Cape Town, South Africa, last May through June. So it was a 6-week program. There was a course and an internship component, so they got to work with sport organizations um, in Cape Town, which was really quite awesome. And it was a really, great experience. I think my students really kind of grew a lot while we were there. Um, and I mean, it was a ton of work, and but it was really important. It was really important to me. It's something I'm really passionate about is improving international education outcomes for students. And in Cape Town, I study sports media. My research is in sports media in emerging markets, and I primarily focus in sub-Saharan Africa. So I really wanted to bring some of that expertise into the program. I could have designed a program that was in Western Europe that achieved similar goals, but I wanted to choose a place that I thought was overall less accessible to students. And I think a lot of students would never go to a
Right.
place like Cape Town if it wasn't for having a like really formal study abroad opportunity. So that was something that I really wanted to focus on, as well as the sporting culture in Cape Town is so strong. Um, it gave us a lot to talk about and do while we were down there. So it really kind of checked all of those boxes. I explored a few other sites, um, both in South Africa and other places on the continent as well. But Cape Town like really kind of checked all the boxes for me. And that's kind of why I ended up choosing it. Um, and yeah, so we ran the program last year for the first time. It's probably one of the scariest, but also like most unbelievable experiences. I just remember like when I got on the plane, I was like, am I really taking students 8,000 miles away? Where and I'm their contact and I'm on my own. But it ended up being amazing. Uh,
Okay.
so
So
I'm
so
glad
was
I
it
did
just
it.
you as faculty, or did you
Yeah.
have any other adults in the room? If so, if any.
So, so I was the only faculty member from
Okay.
NDSU, but did use a program study abroad provider
Okay.
to help me with like the logistical side of things, uh, because that is a whole nother animal. It
Right.
really is. Like if you're really figuring out housing and in-country transportation and potential language barriers. I mean, most people in Cape Town speak English, but it's a very linguistically diverse area.
Hmm.
A lot of Afrikaans, a lot of Xhosa, a lot of so that could have created some challenges for me.
Hmm.
So I used SIT, so the School of International Training, um, and they're great. I mean, they have a permanent office in Cape Town. They organize the homestay families, so my students actually stayed with people in the community,
Hmm.
which I think like really kind of elevated the level of cultural enrichment. Right, it's not like we were just staying at the Hampton Inn that happened to be in
Right.
Cape Town. Like they were really getting to interact with local people in the community, um, which I think made the experience a lot richer. So like it's something that whenever I talk to people about study abroad, I always really rave about the homestay experience. And it's not always feasible. If you're doing a really short-term program, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But
Right.
if you're in the country for more than a month or a month, I think it can be really it can add a lot of value. Um, and plus there were other, again, as you said, like adults who were, looking out for the students and, they were getting home cooked meals and, they had another kind of level, I think, of support besides just myself. So,
Okay. So let's rewind just a little bit. The idea is right. So there's a component that you have to meet, and the sport management component, or the relationship there is not a very obvious one, right? You have to kind of make it fit. So which component did you go after to meet the criteria, and kind of how did you make that fit?
yeah, so I mean, that's a really good question. And I think it's something that a lot of people really struggle with. So, like, I've worked with people who are applying for the ideas grant before, and they always say, like, how can you make like the policy priority piece fit
Hmm.
with your program? And so for me, it was really about like economic development, right? And student skill development. And it's something that like that studying abroad for sport management students is going to make them more competitive in the workforce. So that was, I think, my main element. But also the course itself was based on um, sport for development. right? So how sport is used for developmental purposes. And in South Africa, that's primarily going to be focused on things like global health and youth development. Um, right. So I made that connection as well. And I think that um, clearly it was enough. It was
Right.
enough of a sell for it to work. But yeah, I think like being really kind of intentional um, about why this matters in like a greater scheme was really, really important. So, I mean, I think a lot of my colleagues in sport management see some of these, um, like grants as like not being really accessible for
Mm,
us, right? Because we're not in a traditional international affairs or a STEM field. They're really pushing STEM as for study abroad at the
right.
as a policy priority. But like we bring just as much to the table. And I think a lot of it is in, workforce development for our students, as well as like the very significant role that sport can play in areas like global health, in, human rights, gender equity, youth development, as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, sports is just the vehicle, right? So you just have to
Exactly.
figure out how to make it fit because we don't have our standalone, I guess, things. Even
Right.
like I'm in a business school, everyone's located in a different college, usually,
Right.
whether it's kines or ed or exercise science, public health, whatever it is.
Mhm.
I'm in business, and so I keep telling all the students like it's just business courses. Just we're hyper focused on business in the sports industry,
Exactly.
and so it's not like you couldn't take an accounting class or a finance class and get the same info if you focused on sports, but we're going to only focus on the sports part.
Mhm.
So, like you said, it's just you have to make it. You do have to kind of make it fit for that grant in particular, but there are many ways to approach that. And that's one of the things I struggle. I was like, man, should I apply for a Leeds grant because we have almost no study abroad presence at our university, and we have so many underserved first gen students that are on financial aid. It makes we kind of fit that population that grant is kind of geared towards.
Mhm.
um I guess another question was, so that grant is for 30 something thousand dollars, correct?
Mhm.
And so congratulations on winning that, obviously. But so what does that, I know it's not to actually physically send students abroad. So can you kind of explain what it is used for?
Yeah. So, you can use it for a whole host of things, right? There's a ton of different like allowable costs. So one thing it was for me is that it paid for me to go to South Africa and like create this curriculum, right, in this
Hmm.
network. Right. So, seeing things online, I mean, I had an idea of what I wanted to do, but being able to go there and actually talk to people in person and, really kind of see the lay of the land was completely invaluable. Like I was supposed to go to South Africa in 2020 for a conference, which of course that didn't happen. So it was really important for me to go there on my own before I brought students, right? Like I never want to go to a location for the first time and then bring students. And I would feel that way about any place in the
Right.
world, right? Like I don't know.
Surprise.
Yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable bringing students to like a city in Canada that I had never been to.
Right.
Um, just because I think like that knowledge, that local knowledge is really important. Especially for a place where students are gonna have innate like really like cultural biases, right? I think like people like here like South Africa, they assume that it's just like crime ridden or like safari, that those are like the two images they have in their head. And like Cape Town is like a very cosmopolitan city. So having that local knowledge I think also made students more comfortable. Like they were confident that when I told them it is safe because I've been there, they know.
Right. Right.
um And then it also paid for my costs of the course, so that that fee wasn't like put onto the students as well.
Okay.
So like it pays for like my airfare, so like that, so it does keep some like student costs down in that way, because students don't have to support me as a faculty member. Um, and there I and you know every university is different on how they uh handle that kind of costs. Um, so those were like kind of the two big things that it paid for. Um, and then I know a lot of people also like use it to like buy out some of their teaching or their work so that they can really devote all of their time to this because it is a ton of
Gotcha.
work. So um
You can use it on release time or what?
yeah,
Yeah,
you can
I
use it
gotcha.
exactly. So like release time I think is a really common way that people spend the money because I think for people who have never led a study abroad program, I don't think they really realize like how much work it is um to create the course, create the syllabus, create the assignments, match them to the different activities you're going to be doing in country. Um, like it's a ton of work. Uh, so
Yeah.
it's
No,
not
no.
it's
Brandon
experience.
and I have college coaching experience, and I know that my least favorite thing every year was taking 45 students on a 4 to 5 hour bus trip and planning. I was like, wait a second, I am actually in charge of everything they do, eat, where they sleep, what they're
Mhm,
gonna do for fun, everything in between, and that's just for a week stateside with no new laws, no new customs, and we're just going to Tennessee. Uh, but to do that plus air, I mean, I've been at the one university where like flying is just a whole nother animal. Now obviously you don't typically take 50 students abroad, definitely not by yourself, but the whole idea of, yeah, it just takes so much effort, time, planning, anxiety to get it off the ground and get going. So the point you made about having a partner to actually do the logistics of it, basically, a travel agent for education, uh, allows you to focus on the root of the whole process, right? The whole point of it is to make it educational. And
mhm,
so, like, when I look at, so my dream, being a dual citizen in Germany and having grown up there, like, it is my dream to take a group of students to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and there's no shortage of professional soccer, the Olympic headquarters, motor racing, like whatever it could be. But even as comfortable as I am with all of that and having family in those areas and speaking the language, I still can't imagine doing it by yourself without a partner to just kind of ease the burden. And I can't imagine doing all that and then also being like, all right, here's your assignment and here's the learning objective. It's one thing to take them from place to place on a bus and feed them, but then to incorporate that whole, it's just, I can't imagine. So very insightful so far. You already explained why Cape Town, why South Africa. I guess we can kind of pivot because, well, I one last question I have for you, and I'm not sure if you're allowed to share. What was kind of the cost for this 6 to 8 week trip for these students?
yeah, I can share. So the cost, I mean, it's around 5,000 for
Okay,
6 weeks, and that's not counting their airfare because I students flew from different places. So some students were on the same flight as me from Fargo, um, but some, flew from the Twin Cities, right? One of my students is like from LA, so he flew from there. Right, and others have like their parents have airline preferences, right? Like some are like, "Oh, I'm paying with mile," or my parents are paying with miles or
right.
whatever. So I never like put airfare into it because one, I didn't require them to fly as a group. Um I just said like, "Hey, you got to get here on this day." Uh and go from that. But 5,000 was the kind of the all encompassing, and that included the course, so their lodging, their food, and stuff in Cape Town. So, uh, and the other thing that I think is another benefit of Cape Town that I didn't really mention is that, like the dollar is very strong to the rand, and that makes a huge difference, right? So $1 is about 20 rand. I think it was like 18 or 19. It fluctuated between like 18 and 19 when we were there. Um, so stuff's like really, really reasonably priced
Okay.
for students like when they get there. So like the cost, um, right? So like if you they have and if you take an Uber like to where you need to go, like it's costing you like $3, $4. Like it's
Okay.
pretty cheap. And
No.
you can eat really well for low cost.
Right. Right. Well, considering how
Um,
much a class costs anyway, a 3 credit class, I
mhm.
mean, that's about half the trip right there and just the cost of the credits. So it seems affordable.
Yeah.
Now, do you recommend? You said you went basically right after the winter slash spring semester. Do you think that that's the smart play?
So I think it depends on your location. So Cape Town, it's their winter, and it like so some of their activities don't well, like they lined up like because they're still in school because
Hmm.
their semesters like they start really in February because they have summer in January still.
Hmm.
So like I think that is also a really big kind of factor when you're like selecting a time period. Um, so it made sense for that location, but that might not make sense for all locations. Right. So like I know like sometimes when people do trips in Europe, they'll go over spring break because it's the shoulder season, right? Like if you were thinking about trying to do a trip in like Greece and Italy in the summer, one,
Yeah.
it's going to be absurdly hot.
Yeah.
I was in Europe this past summer and I was absurdly hot. Um, and two, it's going to be like prime tourist season. And like some things might not be as accessible. Whereas in Cape Town, like May isn't really and June aren't really like aren't really touristy time of
Hmm.
the year for Cape Town. A lot of people go there in our winter, their summer, um, as well as like it's really big for like whale watching, but that's like in August. Um, and people
Okay.
go to Kruger and stuff like for national park.
So strategic. Yeah, it has to be strategic. Okay.
Yeah, you have to be really strategic. And I think that's, knowing when like there's going to be better capacity. And that's also, I think, going to keep costs down as well. Like if you're
Yeah.
avoiding tourist time, um, I think that can be really, really important. So knowing, like being aware of that kind of calendar can be really helpful.
Okay. Before I don't want to ask Pod's question for him, so I'll let him jump in.
No, I'm just interested in a little bit of inside baseball for anybody who's listening and maybe hasn't been in higher ed or hasn't worked as a faculty member. So I guess it's a double barrel question, and I hate asking those, but I'm going to. One, is it part of the curriculum that students have to um, have to take? Do they have to take this class, or is there an alternate if they're not able to travel? And then two, how did you get this approved? Was it as easy as going to your dean and saying, "Hey, we talked about this in an interview and I want to do it," or was this like a program change that you had to take through faculty council and all the hoops that go along with that, in addition to actually getting funding?
Yeah. So, first question related to the curriculum, is this is an elective class in sport management. We do have an international sport, it's called Global Perspectives in Sport class, that all students do have to take, and it's here in Fargo. Um, in an ideal world, I would teach that class as abroad at some point. I think that would be like my ideal scenario. And but students would still have the option to take it in Fargo. So it's not required. Like there actually is no study abroad requirement at NDSU. We have a general education global perspectives requirement, and this class does fulfill that. So that is really beneficial. We have like we have a course number that's for study abroad. It's 379, and that will automatically fill that global perspectives gen ed credit. So the class number already existed. I just had to get the course itself approved by my dean. It didn't have to go through the faculty curriculum committee because it was taught in a like one-off.
So it's like a seminar, but
It's
a more
yes, exactly.
official seminar.
It's a
Okay.
more official, yeah, we call them global seminars is what,
Okay.
and like, the topic can change.
Yeah, we call them special topics. Same thing. You
Yep,
can load whatever you want in there. It's a one pager, and the
yeah,
dean has to sign it, and boom, we're good.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean the it's a little bit more involved than if I was just teaching like a special topics seminar in on campus. Um, because I have to demonstrate that the activities map to my learning outcomes. So like my
Hmm.
calendar of events I had to do a map to my learning outcomes, as well as demonstrate the contact hours matched that would be valued as a 3 credit class rather than a 2 or a 1 or a 4. Um, so that was like an additional step that is different from like a traditional on ground or online class here at NDSU. Um, but if you're being really intentional on why you're doing this program and why the activities are valuable, you're doing it anyway, right? Like it's not like an additional, it wasn't an addition. I didn't view it as an additional step because I was doing it anyway. I need to, I needed to demonstrate that the class made sense to me and for the students. So, and I didn't really find it to be like that stringent of a burden. Um, but I think it was also because like I really worked on the development piece and I had a lot of time because I did it over the like having the ideas grant, I had like a year to really do development work on the course and the curriculum before I took students. So I would definitely encourage anyone who's thinking about leading a trip abroad to give themselves at least 12 months, right? So like I would never say to like a listener that like it's feasible for them to plan a trip for this coming summer. If you're thinking about doing it, you're doing it for summer 26 at the earliest. Or spring break 2026 would be the earliest.
Great
If you're
advice.
starting right now.
Great advice. I have one more question for you, which is because you've answered a couple of them. Like that's perfect. I was going to say, what advice do you have? But how did you find marketing the trip to potential students? Was 7 kind of like a happy number for you? Were you hoping for a little bit more, a little bit less, or kind of give me an idea of where your head was at with that and how difficult it was to find the right 7 students, or if you had to turn away anybody or anything like that.
Yeah, so in my head, I was thinking that somewhere between like 8 and 12, 7 and 12 would have worked. I think any more than 12, I would have needed another person, another faculty member to attend to go with me, and that is a big ask. Not so big of an ask when if it's really short, if you're only going for 10 days or 2 weeks, um, faculty can fit that into their schedule. But 6 weeks, like for me, like young, don't have any kids, it's easy for, myself, like like my partner, like he is also a professor, so like he can take time off. He's planning on leading a trip actually now for this coming spring or summer, which is crazy. Um, but any more than 12, I probably would have said like I need another faculty member, and that was something that I was very cognizant of, that upper line. Um, and I think for marketing, a lot of students saw South Africa and were immediately nervous. I think some locations are easier to market than others. Um, I think that's why Western Europe is so popular in study abroad, 'cause it's much easier, you know, students want to go to Spain and Italy. Like that's
It's
those are the
comfortable, but they
yeah.
probably, yeah,
There's a much
they'd like to go either way.
right. Yeah, exactly. And of course cost is always going to be there for students. I think like I had to be really intentional about like showing them like if you break down this cost, what is like, what is it real for how long the program is, the cost benefit analysis is much, more manageable. Whereas, people, I see $5,000 for 2-week programs. Like that is something that's like I think a little less like palatable compared to a longer program. Um and I had to also looking for the right students and also educating them about travel in general. Right, so some of them didn't have passports, so they had to get their passport. Um as well as some students who were Pell eligible, they didn't realize that there's a whole host of international like study abroad scholarships available to them, right? So like if you are Pell eligible, like you can apply for the Gilman scholarship that could be worth up to $5,000. So like I actually had a student who won a Gilman and used it to go on the trip, which was really great. And I think a lot of students like they don't know about those avenues for scholarships. So educating them in that space was also, I think, quite challenging. And now what's kind of great is that if I do this program again, I have students who went who can talk about it. So I think that's another like it's one of those things where the marketing actually like changes the more you do it. Because now you have students who can actually speak to their peers about their experience. So it's like one thing for me to like really tell them as their professor, as like an authority figure, why this is really valuable. But when they have a peer that said like, this trip was amazing, like this changed my life. Like I learned and gained so many skills from this experience.
Those
Um,
testimonials, yeah.
exactly. Like that's something that like is invaluable. So I think like your marketing strategies can change um, based on uh, what your goals are, as well as if you're trying to develop the program a little bit more, how long the program is too, like how many students
Mhm.
you are willing to take. And there are minimum requirements just from the university that I have to abide by. But you can also set more stringent ones if you want to. Like we have a minimum GPA, um, that requirement that they have to have, but you can also raise that if you want to, if there are prereqs. Um, I was trying to limit those barriers. So I didn't say that they had to take a couple classes before
Right.
they came um, and I didn't restrict it based on like student standing. So like if they were a sophomore and they wanted to go, they could. If they were a senior and they wanted to go, that didn't really
Yeah,
matter.
especially the first time, right? Like, just to make sure we have enough.
Exactly.
So, I guess the last question is, when's the next trip?
So I could in theory take students this coming year. I mean I have the program built and I'm doing some like passive marketing. Like if there was a ton of interest,
Mhm.
I would do it. But the idea is that I would go to Cape Town every other year. Uh
Okay.
and then we're exploring ways to rotate, other locations. Like we've already got really strong partners in Cape Town, so I'm going to want to keep going back there, as well as, for my research, like those
Mhm.
connections are really important. Um, so it makes sense for me on two levels. But I think exploring other parts of the world is also something that's like really on our radar. Um, and we also just started a master's program here, so that's kind of been another uh, layer of change, I think, for us. So it's kind of put the study abroad a little bit on the back burner, like comparatively.
Yeah,
Uh, so that,
priorities.
yeah, right. I mean, it's one of those things where I like am very cognizant of like not spreading myself like too thin.
Mhm.
Um, and I've also got, there's also like a couple other like opportunities that I'm seeking out that might make it impossible for me to go
Right.
every year, without like drastically like reducing what the program is, right? So like 6 weeks is a long time. It's like basically half of my
Right.
summer, right? Which is time that I use for writing and other curriculum development, and
Right.
also just like,
Which by the way, the research focus is extremely specific and not the first thing I think of when I think of North Dakota State sport management would be sub-Saharan Africa
yeah,
sports media. So I have to give it to you there because that was not on my bingo card to put those two things together. And I think I'm interested, and that was going to be my last thing is, do you have any research in the pipeline that you want to share or talk about or excited about?
yeah. So I some research projects that are under review that should be coming out in the next year. You guys know how the review process works.
Yep.
It's not always the quickest thing in the world. But I've done a lot of research on the Basketball Africa League, so like what the NBA's inroads are into sub-Saharan Africa.
Mhm.
So I've got a couple different things on that, like media presentation. One's been out for a while, and then we've got two other like kind of follow-ups on how they're, using social media to try to like gain this to grow this audience for
Yeah,
a
I did some
sport
poking
that
around because I want to share. I teach a media relations and sport class right now. I'm like, this would
Mm,
be really interesting because we're so hyper focused on what we do here in the States to
exactly.
give them another example outside.
And what I think is, I mean, Africa is the youngest continent. It's growing really rapidly. Um, and they are also, when I talk to people there, like I want to ask them questions about like their sports system. Like I want to talk about rugby and I want to talk about football, like not American football, but they like want to ask me about Patrick Mahomes, right? Or like
Right.
or LeBron James. So like there's this really like strong interest in American sports um in a lot of places in Africa, which I think is really interesting. And like the NBA is really working probably the hardest out of any of the US professional leagues to make inroads in Africa. Right, because if they can find the next Joel Embiid, that's worth it to them from a
Yeah.
market standpoint, right? So there's tons of investment. Um, and yeah, I mean that's what I think is like really interesting about research in general is that it might sound like not that intuitive that I do emerging market research in a place like North Dakota, but um I think that's also like what's really, really great about
Well, yeah, there's interesting
it.
work being done everywhere, and like
Right.
that's no knock on anyone or anything. It's just like that's not the first thing I think of.
No.
Honestly, I didn't know anybody in the States was studying that specific thing. So kudos to you, and I'm interested to read more about it. I did start poking around,
Mm.
um, but we really appreciate your time and your insight into not only just study abroad, but also just the global take, a global perspective on everything, which gives us more episode ideas for the future because we are so hyper focused on because it is the globalization of sport. I mean, we talk about sports sociology all the time,
Hmm.
but we take a look at it from what's the US's influence on the globalization of sport, not how are we influenced on other. So
Mm.
I Brandon will have to put that on the list of things to do. More episodes on globalization of sport and global
One of my
influences.
favorite things that's come up. So this is our third episode in a row where we've had a fellow faculty member in sport management, and to steal a line from our kids, sport management faculty stretching themselves thin is very on brand. If we're noticing a theme as we bring our guests on the show, and it's just interesting to see the different areas that we've got people in sport. And it's something I just had some meetings last week with some people about this. What happens on the field is just such a small percentage of what actually goes on in that $600 billion ecosystem. There's so many more things going on and so much fantastic research. So I love what you're doing, Dr. Slater. I think it's fantastic how you've built this up, and hopefully a great marketing piece. And there's a lot of domestic programs where students can pay, but I think getting that course credit and being able to go for 6 weeks at a reasonable price internationally to a place that's a little bit more underserved than your Western Europe's is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean it's something that is definitely very unique, which I think I kind of appreciate. because there's so many people doing amazing things in sport management, and it's something that, kind of sets us a little bit apart at NDSU, and I think really important. I want to continue to be this kind of leader, and I want to partner with more people who are interested in doing this. So it's like another like really great thing about like coming on the show is like hopefully I can meet other faculty members who are like, yes, let's keep doing this. Let's keep building these opportunities, right? Because I don't, it's not just for, for my students, but for everyone in our ecosystem. I think it's so important. So if the more people who know about it, right? Like I hope all the ideas people are probably going to come to me and they're like, why are all these sport management people applying for our grant now? And it's like, well, that's good because
Yep.
we need to keep creating these opportunities. Um, so that's something that I really hope for as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the whole point of the show, right? Is
Yep.
we're trying to help people bridge those gaps and hopefully find out things that they didn't know, or maybe they didn't know that they didn't know. Just like with our students, they have no idea what they don't know, and either do we sometimes, because we talked about experiential learning, we talked about project-based learning, we're talking about now study abroad. We're just trying to fill as many gaps and give ourselves new ideas because it can get stale, especially us at teaching universities that all we're doing is constantly curriculum development, and
Yep.
it's like, how do we freshen this up? How do we make sure that we're staying at the forefront instead of just always chasing? And so that's hopefully what we're doing here. But thank you so much for your time. uh, we'll end the show there, and it'll be produced and published on well, usually Wednesdays. Today is Wednesday. Pod, I'm not going to try to make you do it tonight, so we'll go with next Wednesday is when we're going to release this.
Got it.
Mostly on LinkedIn and Twitter is where we kind of publish it. And then, yeah, I'm happy to send you a link, but I'll also tag you, so that'll probably make it easier on LinkedIn. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
you're welcome.
And if you ever need anything, just let us know. I mean, this is a huge networking piece for us. Meeting people that do like the research that you're doing and just other forms of research and getting guest speaker ideas and all of these things. It's kind of why we're doing all of this. So
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm always happy to guest speak in classes. I've done a couple
all
media
right.
probably in the last year or two.
Yeah, well, you have a unique perspective, so I'm sure it'd be good. So thank you so much, Kelsey. And like I said, if you ever need anything, you just let us know.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye.